I'm Emily Shurmer, and you're listening to In Conversation, a podcast brought to you by Sat7.
Sometimes the story we get before we turn on the camera is much more authentic and truthful and real than the story we get when they go on air.
Well, hi Maggie, thanks so much for joining us. I'm Emily and I work in the UK office in the communications team. So yeah, it's really exciting to get to sit with you today and ask some questions. Could you just start by introducing yourself and telling us a bit about who you are?
My name is Maggie Morgan and I'm Egyptian, and I've been making films for 20 years, and I've also been working with Sat7 for quite a long time. In the beginning, I was a freelancer, and I was very young, and the very first film I ever made was shown on Sat7. And so, yeah, Sat7 has a very special place in my heart.
Yeah. So why did you sort of choose Sat7 to share your stories and your films?
I think when I first started, the first work that I did was about people with special needs in the Middle East, and this is like over 20 years ago, little over 20 years ago. And at the time, nobody cared, really. None of the secular channels cared at all. And I was naive, I was young, I was like, of course, you know, we have this great content, why aren't they gonna show it? And I knocked many doors and people didn't care, like, this doesn't bring advertisements. And Sat7 said yes. And then they said yes to a documentary about female genital mutilation. And it just so happened that a Christian channel cared very much about human rights, and so a relationship was forged then for me.
And now you're the head of gender and freedom of religion and belief, is that right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Obviously, gender inequality in Egypt and the region is very complex, a complex issue to deal with. It's happening in the home and in communities and in wider society. So how do you even start to kind of unravel that and start to make a difference?
I think unravel is a really good word, because it's just like very complicated. I think the idea of gender inequality, a lot of people are aware of that. A lot of women are aware that things are not fair. It's the freedom of religion and belief part that was harder to bring into the discussion, because the way we're raised in the Middle East is to be obedient and not to question authority. If that authority is religious, even more so. So, and also because, you know, we live in a predominantly Islamic culture, but also the Christians in the Middle East share the same culture. You know, we were the same somehow. In terms of the way women are treated, and in terms of the beliefs and family life and so on. And so to tell people that, you know, what you've learned may not be, you know, truth with a capital T, and you're allowed to ask questions, and you have freedom to question what your religious leaders tell you. That's trickier. So when we started working on Today Not Tomorrow, we started with topics like, you know, for example, we started with the church, because, you know, that's closer to home. Although, again, these issues are common in all of society. Something like domestic violence, it's prevalent. And so, if women are being beaten, sometimes they would go to the priest or they go to the sheikh in the mosque. And often the priest would say, you know, love bears all things. They would quote 1 Corinthians 13 and say, you know, love bears all things, and look how much Christ suffered for you. So this is your cross, you need to bear it.
So it was coming even from within the church?
Oh, for sure, yes. And so freedom of religion and belief means that in the program we tell women, you know what, think twice. Maybe this isn't what's being said in the Bible. And I know that from my acquaintances in other circles, that there's a lot of similar work being done in Islamic circles as well.
Yeah. So tell me then about your program Today Not Tomorrow. What's kind of the concept? What's it about?
The idea of the program was that we would have a truck and that we would go from community to community and talk about issues that had to do with what are the things that nobody questions. Let's ask questions about them. Usually they're things that are related to religion, accepted religious beliefs. And there are so many, and a lot of them have to do with gender. I mean, like I said, domestic violence, but also with things like sexual abuse. People misuse the idea of forgiveness, to perpetuate a lot of ongoing abuse. Also with things like, the obvious things, who's the head of the home, things like that. But, one of the things that was really interesting to me as well is the way people explain pain and suffering by misquoting, or maybe not misquoting, quoting out of context certain biblical texts and other texts to kind of justify is not the right word, but to kind of excuse oppression and make people compliant. That is extremely disturbing. So the idea of freedom to think about what you're being taught in the religious institutions and make up your own mind, that I feel is a new thing that we're doing. Gender inequality is, people are aware of it. They don't know what to do about it, but they're aware. Yeah.
And have you had much kind of pushback on some of those things? Has there been hostility even from the church or institutions? From
different institutions, yes. From the church specifically, sometimes. Sometimes our presenters would be in certain places on the street and you're like, oh, you're the people that are always criticizing the church and the religious institutions. We do have, unfortunately, that reputation. We don't mean it, because there are a lot of religious leaders that we do host on our program that don't say these things. But unfortunately, the vast majority do. And we have one of our presenters, I wish she were here. She's always like, when she goes to church, I don't want to say she's not critical as in to find the faults, but she's a very intelligent woman, and she has a lot. She uses her critical thinking to analyze what's being said, and sometimes the priest will talk to the moms and say, look at you. All these kids are behaving very badly because you're not good moms, as if there's no dad in the home. That kind of religious discourse,
So just practically then, with the show, you have this truck with a set on the back of the truck. Has that been challenging to kind of film that way? Or, what was some of the practical kind of considerations of taking it out there?
It's super challenging to film on the back of the truck. Egypt, Cairo is very noisy.
Yeah.
And when we go to villages, we have kids. I have some pictures with I'm here in front of the monitor, and there are kids all around me looking at the monitor.
It's exciting. Yeah.
There's those challenges, but that's fun. That's okay. Yeah. There are, of course, also the challenges with shooting permits in Egypt, which are increasingly more and more difficult to get. And we've had it's happened once that the live was canceled because we were asked not to film. And I don't know how much we can keep it up, given the political climate in Egypt doesn't allow a lot of filming.
And are there any places you go where it's kind of dangerous to be there, or is it fairly safe on the roads? And
dangerous in what way?
Like if people saw what you were doing, would they?
Yeah. Like sometimes one place that we had an episode on Palestine on October 14th.
Yeah.
We had an episode on Palestine, and we were in an outdoor location in a very popular neighborhood, and we had a Palestinian guest who lived in. We flew her over. She lived in Bethlehem, and a lot of the people were not happy with what we were doing, and they're like, "You're Christians. We didn't know you were Christians," and there was sometimes there's that.
Yeah. And the women you meet and that come on the truck and that you speak to, are any of them kind of hostile to your questions, or is it mostly positive, kind of the way you engage with them?
I wouldn't say they're hostile, but sometimes the story we get before we turn on the camera is much more authentic and truthful and real than the story we get when they go on air.
Yeah.
That's been an ongoing challenge, which is why this project is good, because we get to do a lot of work without filming.
Yeah. Is that because they're kind of ashamed of things that have happened to them, or embarrassed? Or?
They're ashamed, or sometimes they don't want to bear the brunt of actually, they don't have the freedom to voice their own opinions. There are repercussions to them saying what they really believe. And sometimes, you know, I understand. We can't ask people to you know.
Especially when they're appearing on screen. And
sure.
Yeah, it's brave to share their stories that way. Yeah.
And it's brave to also say their opinions, the real opinions of the priest, of the sheikh, of the dad, of the, you know, like.
You're listening to In Conversation, a podcast brought to you by Sat7. Keep an eye out for our new monthly streaming schedule, including 7-minute briefings, our In Conversation extended interviews, and a new Voices from the Middle East feature, where you can reflect more deeply on stories of faith from our viewers and join with us in praying for the people of the region. See the links in the show notes for more details. Have you got any favourite stories of someone who's shared their story, or even someone who's kind of changed their perspective from watching the show?
Yes, I mean, we've evolved. When we started going on air, we had people sending WhatsApps to the number or calling us, etc. And also we have the Facebook group that's just for women. And so there were people that were regulars. And then slowly they became so regular that we wanted to meet them, you know, like who are these people, etc. And I think that a lot of them were really impacted by what we were saying, and some of them now work with us because they're like, I would say they're project representatives in their communities. Those are inspiring stories because they told us that, this content changed the way they thought and they dealt with things, etc.
Obviously your faith plays a big part in your work. What is it about Jesus' message of good news that you think these women most need to hear?
I used to always find a lot of inspiration from a verse that's actually in Jude. And the translation that I remember is from the Message, so it's probably not the most common translation of that verse. But I think it's, I'll paraphrase, to him who's able to keep you from falling. And the translation I like, to him that is able to keep you standing tall, unashamed, you know. It's like a benediction. Sometimes they use it at church, but in the Message, it's like, I feel like the message of the gospel gives dignity to people, takes away shame. So instead of looking down and being broken, you know, it's a message that helps you stand tall. I think the one I like says bright-eyed and shining in front of Christ, something like that. I'm sorry, I feel I could look it up.
We can look it up later. So what have you learned in the last couple of years working on these projects?
I think what I've learned essentially, I don't know if I was able to say it properly, but I've learned to pray differently. And I've learned that prayer really matters. I know it sounds like a cliche, but one of the things I remember very distinctly, very early days of the show, about 1.5 years ago, we went to a village, and in that village was a small church, and we were going live at 9 p.m. And we were all nervous because, you know, going live outside the studio, you could have a lot of technical difficulties, etc. And I just needed a moment. I went to this church, it was empty, and I thought I need a moment on my own to pray. And as I was walking outside of the church, there was this woman from the village, and she saw me. She's like, you came here to film? I'm like, yeah. She's like, can I take a picture with you? I said, you know, I'm not the presenter, I'm just behind the camera. The presenters are there, you can take a picture with them. She said, no, I want to take a picture with you. And so I was like, okay, you know, whatever. Do you have, so, okay, let's take a picture. She's like, yeah, I don't have a phone. I'm like, okay, we can use my phone and we take a picture and I can send it to you. So we took a picture and I said to her, okay, give me your number so I can send you the picture. She's like, I don't own a phone. And I was like, okay. And then she's like, I want you to, when you look at the picture's for you. When you look at the picture, remember that in these villages, that there's a woman, her name is Damiana. She said that Damiana is praying for you and that we appreciate that you guys come all the way. And so it's humbling to think that it's not like we're the people from Cairo that are coming to help these people. I truly believe that she prays for us. I truly believe that she, you know, cares that we come, and I learned from her. You know, so it's not a top-down approach. Even with donors and even with supporters, I feel like that's why I meant to say, you know, we pray for all of us because we're all, like, there's no cure for being human. We all have problems, right? This is different degrees.
Yeah. So that leads well into my next question, which is how our supporters can be praying for you and your work. Is there anything in particular you'd like some prayer for?
Yeah, I think whenever you think of just normal human difficult situations that happen to human beings, think maybe or try to imagine what it's like for someone to be going through that situation with a lot less rights, a lot less freedom, and a lot less money, and a lot less access to healthcare than someone in a more privileged situation or country. And think of them and then pray for the two of you, you know, whatever the situation is.
Yeah, so praying for us.
For us, yeah.
Yeah, together, yeah.
I mean, I can give examples if you want, but...
Yeah, can you give some?
Yeah, like for example, just, I mean, because this is really what happens, like when I travel sometimes to other countries with more freedom, more healthcare, you know, like let's say, for example, that a woman in the UK or in Canada has breast cancer, and a woman in a village in Egypt has breast cancer. She's the one in Egypt is going to be probably mistreated by her doctors, yelled at, treated without any dignity, not given any choice. She doesn't have the freedom to ask questions, all that. It's a similarly difficult situation for a woman in a more privileged situation, but they have more rights and more freedom. So when someone goes through something like that, pray for someone else who has it a bit more difficult.
Yeah. Lots of our supporters might not be aware of the kind of discrimination that Christians face in Egypt in particular. And it was the story about the girls who were made to sit at the back. Is that quite common? I hadn't heard of that before.
Yes. You know, in Egypt, you know, it's very hard to be black and white about persecution. If you ask me, and I'm an Egyptian Christian, do I feel persecuted against? I would say no, I don't. But that my story is not the only story. And yes, I mean, these girls, we did this episode because these were some of our viewers that told us that this happened in their village, and then we asked in another village, and it's very common.
Yeah, so they're asked to sit at the back.
And
because
cover
they're
their
Christians
hair.
And cover their hair.
And cover their hair, yes. And they're also verbally abused, you know, like as if they have lower moral standards than others. Yes, this is common, unfortunately, it's still happening. And the thing is, when we talk about freedom of religion and belief, you know, we talk to the girls, do you object? You can say no. That would mean that a lot of people have to say no at the same time. It would mean that the parents have to, you know, also support, etc. And for so many of them, is it worth it? You know, you have to choose your battles. No, but that's common. There is this, in the villages, for sure, there's discrimination. In more popular neighborhoods, this doesn't happen at a fancy, expensive international school, obviously, to a Christian girl there. But, you know.
Rural places.
And the more underprivileged, I mean, it's always the weakest link.
Yeah. But then when those stories are shared on your programme, other people will see it and they'll start to realise that's actually not okay.
Yes.
That's kind of...
And I find, and that's why I use these interviews, there's so many more. I thought these girls were really brave.
Yeah, really brave.
Because they're still in school. Yeah. They're still going to the school that asked them to cover their hair and sit in the back.
Yeah. And what would happen if they said no, they get beaten?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Another thing, actually, physical beating, what they call corporal punishment is still pretty commonplace in a lot of Egyptian schools. Nobody thinks it's wrong.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for speaking to us.
Thank you.
Yeah, that was really interesting.
Thank you for all these great questions.
Yeah. Take a look at today's show notes, where you'll find a link to the film studio interview. Thank you for listening to In Conversation, a podcast brought to you by Sat7.